Yeah. Dr. Ahmed Shaheed, thank you for giving your time to us.
And out of the picture.
I really appreciate it. I'm going to come with short questions and just referring to some situation, and after that you can just give your personal idea about it. South Azerbaijani civil rights inside Iran were labeling by wrong things like they're spying the land to Turkey and Azerbaijan, and if these civil activists come out of Iran, they referred just spying the land to Israel and the United States. You experience the same from the Iranian government. Do you think that Iran's government can run away facing the challenge of human rights in this way?
Well, if you look at what happens in Iran, there are very serious allegations of rights violations by using what I call overly broad, if you like, use of what I call permitted limitations on rights. So for national security, there are certain limits you can impose, but they must be legitimate, they must be proportional, they must be defined in law. But actual fact, what happens in Iran is that they use it very, very widely. So it is common, in my experience, to come across allegations that people who have been legitimately exercising their rights, such as cultural activists, such as religious activists, or others would face national security charges. So the idea you can use national security charges as cover to suppress legitimate rights is a concern. And at the end of the day, I think the human rights focus on countries is expanding. So I think all countries must explain themselves properly. Iran did so in a sense to the UPR, where it had to face all of these criticisms, it had to explain itself. And there are annual discussions on Iran where Iran must explain why it is doing things the way they are doing. Iran is party to the two main covenants on human rights, and under these covenants there are legitimate rights that are guaranteed to ethnic minorities.
Yeah, thank you. And my second question is about, as you know, just civil rights working long time with the case inside Iran. I'm focusing on South Azerbaijani Turks as much as the other minorities as well. And after a long period, they want to change idea to think about self-governing and sometimes self-determination from Iran. They really want this situation. How you can put these two concepts inside the human rights?
Which two concepts are you saying?
Self-determination and self-governing by minorities from...
Well, human rights agenda is a very broad one. In my work, I'm focusing on the key areas in which Iran has agreed to honor international standards. And I'm basing my work primarily on the Universal Periodic Review commitments I undertook 4 years ago. So, freedoms are defined very broadly. There is debate about the place of democracy, but certainly if you don't have democracy, we wouldn't have respect for human rights. Same with some of the other collective rights as well. If you look at the standards, yes, self-determination is a principle of human rights. Every person has to have the right to determine his or her destiny freely. But you can confuse human rights agenda with other agendas as well. So what happens here is that I am trying to see how people in Iran within their own groups can have their freedoms within the current constitution. So if you look at the current constitution, Iran has a number of different groups there, and it recognizes every group as having legitimate rights as equal citizens. So I'm approaching this from the perspective of equality of all groups and of equal citizenship. I don't want to get into the area of self-determination and other demands being made by various groups because it can become a very contested issue.
How is it actually hard to work with the human rights case in Iran?
Well, the difficulty is lack of proper cooperation from Iran. If the government of Iran were to, cooperate with me by inviting me to the country and letting me speak to people who want to speak to me, it will be a very big help. If at the same time, if people in the country were allowed to speak freely, express their concerns in terms of not being penalized for communicating with me or with other UN human rights mechanisms, that would also be, I think, a very, very good start. And in the absence of cooperation, and when there are strong attacks on human rights defenders, it's very difficult to monitor and work on human rights progress.
And what can the human rights activists do?
In the country?
Outside of the country, but because inside the country is absolutely difficult to do.
Well, it is very important that we try to engage the government of Iran and moderates in the government on human rights discourse. I think dialogue is a very important part of achieving progress on human rights. Equally, it's very, very important people understand the whole picture there. We should not exaggerate, nor should we ignore things that are happening there. So a real and true picture of what's happening in the country should be communicated to as widely as possible to the global community of nations, because they care about what's happening in Iran. People do care about Iran as a nation, Iran as a people. So it is important people know factual accounts of what's happening in the country.
At the end, I want to beg you something, because as we just talked together, and Iran's government and some people inside Iran, they use the term of Azari or Azerbaijani Turks, and it is absolutely the concept of assimilation inside Iran. We really want to beg you, just is it possible for you, for the next reports you're going to give, just instead of using Azari word, using just Azerbaijani Turks inside Iran?
Well, this is a difficult problem for me, because in many terms I use in my report, government of Iran contests the term I use, and sort of many other groups. So the best way for me would be to look at if there are settled UN phraseology to use those phrases. So I am looking at settled UN descriptions to describe various communities. I don't want to get drawn into, if you like, an internal debate on what is the proper description to any community there. That is, I think, something people should be able to resolve peacefully and freely among themselves. Not for me to decide, what label I should choose, depend when there are contesting terms being used by the authorities and by the community in question.
Yeah, thanks for your time and thanks for your help.